On July 14, 2026, a single government report quietly took roughly a full percentage point off your 2027 Social Security raise. There was no vote, no signing ceremony, and no announcement addressed to you. By the time this ends, you will know which 3 reports still to come decide the real number, and why that smaller raise could still leave you better off than the bigger one you were promised a month ago. That last part sounds impossible. It is the most important thing in this video, and almost nobody is reporting it. Here is what happened. The Bureau of Labor Statistics released the June inflation numbers at 8:30 in the morning. By lunchtime, every serious estimate of next year's cost of living adjustment had been rewritten downward. 1 month earlier, the independent analyst Mary Johnson had projected a 4.7% increase for 2027, a number that would have ranked as the 4th largest adjustment in 36 years. After the June report, according to CNBC, she cut that projection to 3.7%. AARP now projects 3.6%. The Senior Citizens League projects 3.8%. You will also understand by the end why the index Washington uses to calculate all of this was never designed around how you actually spend money, and why that single technical decision has cost you more than any adjustment ever gave you. Start with the number that caused all of this. According to CNBC and CBS News, the Consumer Price Index rose 3.5% over the 12 months ending in June. Economists had forecast 3.9%. In May, the same measure had hit 4.2%, which was a 3-year high. So in 1 month, headline inflation fell by 0.7 of a point, driven mostly by a decline in energy prices. If you drive, if you heat a house, if you have watched your grocery receipt climb for 2 straight years, that sounds like unambiguously good news. For your Social Security check, it is not that simple. The cost of living adjustment is not a policy decision. Nobody in Congress sits down and decides you deserve a raise. It is an arithmetic output. Lower inflation mechanically produces a smaller adjustment. That is the system working exactly as designed. The relief you feel at the gas pump in July becomes a smaller deposit in your account every month for the rest of your life, because Social Security increases compound. Every future adjustment is calculated on top of the base you carry forward. That is the part that catches people. A raise you never received has already been reduced, and it will echo forward through every year you draw a benefit after that. Now hold 2 facts side by side. The Social Security Administration will not announce the official 2027 adjustment until October 14, 2026, and the number it announces will be based on data that does not exist yet. The June report that triggered all these revised headlines is not actually used in the calculation at all. Read that again. The report that moved every forecast this month does not count. The adjustment is computed from the average of just 3 months of data, July, August, and September, compared against the same 3 months a year earlier. As of the day this was written, none of those 3 reports had been published. The July figures arrive in August. The August figures arrive in September. The September figures arrive in October, days before the announcement. So what you have right now is not a raise. It is a forecast built on a trend, and that trend has already reversed once this year. In May, inflation was accelerating and analysts were talking about a 4.7% adjustment. In June, it decelerated sharply and they moved to the mid-threes. Alex Moore, a statistician for the Senior Citizens League, put it plainly to CBS News. Inflation, he said, is pretty unstable right now. Unstable cuts both ways. Everyone reporting this story treated the drop as settled. It is not settled. 3 reports still decide it, and there is a second number, sitting on the Medicare side of the ledger, that will determine whether any of this raise ever actually reaches your bank account. That number is the one you should be watching, and it is moving in a direction almost nobody expected. Before anything else, it is worth being precise about what the Bureau of Labor Statistics published on July 14, because the headline number and the number that governs your benefit are 2 different things. The figure that led every news story was the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers. That is the broad measure, the one reported as simply inflation. It rose 3.5% over the 12 months ending in June, according to CNBC and CBS News. Against a forecast of 3.9%, that was a substantial miss, and markets reacted to it immediately. But Social Security does not use that index. It uses a narrower one called the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers, abbreviated CPIW according to Fed Smith. The June CPIW index level came in at 327.075. The relevant baseline, the third quarter average from 2025, was 317.265. Run that comparison, and you get roughly 3.1%. Notice the gap. The number in the headlines was 3.5%. The number relevant to your check, measured against the baseline that matters, was closer to 3.1%. Neither of those is the final adjustment, because the final adjustment uses only July, August, and September. But it tells you something useful. The measure that governs your benefit was running softer than the one making news. Why the decline happened matters too. According to CBS News, the June drop was driven substantially by falling energy prices. Energy is the most volatile component in the entire index. It swings on refinery outages, on weather, on decisions made by producers on the other side of the world. A June decline in energy tells you very little about where the index sits in September. This is the structural problem with reading any single month. The adjustment you receive in January 2027 will be computed from a 3-month window in late summer and early fall. Gasoline prices in that window, heating costs entering the fall, food prices after the summer harvest, all of it lands inside the calculation. A hurricane that disrupts Gulf refining in September would push the number up. A continued slide in crude would push it down. Consider the recent history because it makes the volatility concrete. The 2023 adjustment was 8.7%, the largest since 1981. The 2022 adjustment was 5.9%. The 2026 adjustment, the one you are living on right now, was 2.8%. Those numbers are not gently drifting. They lurch. There is one more thing about the June report worth sitting with. The 3.5% figure represents a genuine cooling from May's 4.2%, and 4.2% was a 3-year high. So within roughly 60 days, the inflation picture went from the worst reading in 3 years to a meaningful improvement. If the picture can move that far in 60 days, it can move again in the 90 days that actually count. Which raises the question that should be sitting in your mind right now. If the number that decides your raise has not been measured yet, why did every forecaster revise downward with such confidence? And what happens to your check if they are wrong in the other direction? Almost every story published in the days after July 14 shared one quiet flaw. They reported a revised forecast as though it were a result. So it is worth walking carefully through the actual machinery, because once you understand it, you will read every remaining headline this year differently. The cost of living adjustment has been calculated the same way since 1975. The Social Security Administration takes the CPIW readings for July, August, and September of the current year, averages those 3 months, and compares that average to the average of the same 3 months in the previous year. The percentage difference, rounded to the nearest tenth, is the adjustment. That is the entire formula, no discretion, no committee, no vote. 3 things follow from it, and each one contradicts something in the coverage. First, only 3 months matter out of 12. The inflation you experienced in January of this year is irrelevant. February, March, April, May, June, all irrelevant. If prices had spiked violently in the spring and then collapsed by August, your adjustment would reflect the collapse and not the spike, even though you actually lived through both. The formula does not measure your year. It measures a window. Second, the comparison is against the same window a year earlier, not against the most recent months. This is why a falling monthly rate does not automatically mean a small adjustment. What matters is the level of the index in the fall of 2026 relative to the level in the fall of 2025. According to Fed Smith, the June CPIW index stood at 327.075 against a third quarter 2025 baseline of 317.265. If the index simply holds flat through September, the adjustment lands near 3.1%. If it resumes climbing at even a modest monthly pace, it moves back toward the high threes or beyond. Read that carefully, because it is the single most counterintuitive fact in this entire story. Inflation can keep falling on a monthly basis, and your adjustment can still come in higher than currently projected, because the adjustment measures a level against a level, not a rate against a rate. Third, and this is the detail that trips almost everyone, there is a rule about zero. If the calculation produces a negative number, meaning prices actually fell over the year, the adjustment is not negative. It is set to zero. Your benefit does not decrease. That has happened 3 times in 2010, in 2011, and in 2016. It is not a live risk this year at anything close to current readings, but it explains why the system has an asymmetry built into it that generally favors the beneficiary at the bottom of the range. Now apply this machinery to the fall of 2026. The July data will be published in mid-August. That report is the first one that actually enters the formula. Watch energy in particular, because energy drove the June decline, and energy is the component most likely to reverse. The August data arrives in mid-September. Late summer typically brings food price movement as the harvest lands, and it also brings the first signals of fall heating demand in fuel oil and natural gas markets. The September data arrives in mid-October, only days before the announcement itself. That report carries disproportionate weight in the public conversation because it is the last one, though arithmetically it is worth exactly 1/3, the same as the other two. Between now and then, several things could move the number in either direction. Energy markets are the largest single swing factor. Shelter costs, which carry an enormous weight in the index and tend to move slowly, have been the most persistent source of inflation for several years. Medical care services enter the index too, at a weight far below what an older household actually spends. What you should take from all of this is not a prediction. It is a posture. The 3.6 to 3.8% range being reported everywhere right now is a reasonable central estimate built on a trend line, published by serious people, using the only data available. It is not a measurement. Nobody has measured a single month of the 3 that count. And the person who told CBS News that inflation is pretty unstable right now was not hedging for the sake of caution. Alex Moore was describing an environment that produced a 3-year high in May and a substantial miss to the downside in June, 60 days apart. Which brings us back to the thing that makes this story matter emotionally rather than just arithmetically. Because whatever the final number turns out to be, millions of people have already spent a month planning around a figure that never existed. There is something genuinely strange about this story, and it is worth naming directly. Millions of people have already emotionally adjusted to a raise that does not exist. In June, the reporting said 4.7%. That number circulated widely. It was described accurately as potentially the 4th largest cost of living adjustment in 36 years. People read that. People did arithmetic on it. Some of them made decisions around it. In July, the same reporting says 3.6 to 3.8%. Nothing was taken from you because nothing had been given. And yet the loss is real in a way that is hard to explain to anyone who does not live on a fixed income. Here is why it is real. When your income does not move, your entire financial year is planned around one number that changes once. Everyone else adjusts continuously. A working household absorbs inflation through raises, through overtime, through changing jobs, through picking up extra work. You do not have those levers. You have one adjustment, announced in October, effective in January, and then you hold that number for 12 months while every price around you keeps moving. So when the projected adjustment drops by a full point, you are not losing a hypothetical. You are losing a full point of your only defense mechanism for an entire year with no way to make it up. The Senior Citizens League has quantified the cumulative version of this problem. According to its analysis, cited by the Motley Fool, the purchasing power of Social Security income has fallen roughly 20% since 2010. That is not a projection. That is the measured result of adjustments that consistently ran behind the actual cost increases faced by older households, year after year, compounding quietly. 20%. Think about what that means in practice. It means that if your benefit felt adequate in 2010, the same benefit today buys about 4/5 of what it did, even after every annual adjustment you received. Every one of those adjustments was calculated correctly according to the formula. The formula is the problem, and we will get to exactly why. There is a second effect that almost never gets discussed. Social Security adjustments compound. Your 2027 benefit becomes the base for your 2028 adjustment, which becomes the base for 2029, and so on. A 1-point difference in a single year does not stay a 1-point difference. It permanently lowers the platform every subsequent increase is calculated from. Run it forward. If you are 66 today and you draw benefits for another 20 years, a single point of adjustment surrendered in 2027 quietly reduces every payment for those 2 decades. The gap widens each year rather than closing. There is a further consequence that reaches beyond your own benefit. Survivor benefits are calculated from the deceased worker's benefit amount, including every adjustment that benefit accumulated. So a lower base does not stop at your death. It transfers. A surviving spouse who steps up to the higher of the two benefits inherits whatever base was built, including every year the adjustment came in below the actual cost increases that household faced. Decisions made by an arithmetic formula in 2027 can still be shaping a household budget in 2045. This is also why the annual conversation about the adjustment tends to feel disproportionate to outsiders. Someone still working reads a headline about a raise moving from 4.7% to 3.6% and thinks it is a rounding error. Someone whose entire annual income is set by that percentage understands that it is the only variable in their financial life that they cannot influence, cannot negotiate, and cannot offset with additional effort. None of this means the June inflation reading was bad news. Lower inflation genuinely helps you because your actual costs rise more slowly. In principle, a smaller adjustment against smaller price increases leaves you roughly where you were. In principle, the reason that principle keeps failing decade after decade comes down to a technical decision made in 1975 that almost nobody outside of Washington has ever examined. And once you see it, you will understand why your adjustment has felt insufficient for as long as you can remember. Percentages are abstract. Let us convert this into the number that actually shows up in your account. According to CBS News, the average Social Security retirement benefit as of January 2026 was $2,071 per month. That is the average across all retired workers, so your figure may sit well above or below it, but it is the right anchor for understanding scale. Apply the current range of estimates. At 3.6%, the AARP projection, the average monthly benefit rises by roughly $75. At 3.8%, the Senior Citizens League projection, it rises by roughly $79. CBS News puts the resulting average benefit at approximately $2,149 per month. Now apply the projection that was circulating 1 month earlier. At 4.7%, the same $2,071 benefit would have risen by roughly $97. So the difference between the June projection and the July projection is somewhere in the range of $18 to $22 per month for the average recipient. Call it $20. $20 a month sounds small. This is precisely where most coverage stops, and it is where the analysis goes wrong. $20 a month is $240 a year, but because adjustments compound, that $240 is not a one-time reduction. It is a permanent reduction in the base. In year 2, you are $240 behind plus the adjustment you did not earn on those $240. By year 5, the cumulative gap is well past $1,000. By year 15, for someone drawing benefits from 66 into their 80s, the cumulative difference lands in the multiple thousands. And that is for the average benefit. If your benefit runs higher, say $3,000 a month, every one of those figures scales up proportionally. A full point on $3,000 is $30 a month, $360 a year before compounding. There is another dimension worth understanding. The adjustment is a percentage, which means it delivers the largest dollar increases to people with the largest benefits. Someone receiving $3,500 a month gets more than twice the dollar increase of someone receiving $1,500 a month from the identical percentage. Meanwhile, the fixed costs that eat the adjustment, and Medicare Part B is the clearest example, are the same dollar amount for both of them. Hold that thought, because it is the hinge of this entire story. If the Part B premium rises by, say, $13 a month, that consumes 17% of a $75 raise for the average recipient. For someone whose benefit is $1,200 a month, the same 3.6% adjustment produces roughly $43, and that same $13 premium increase consumes 30% of it. The formula is identical for everyone. The outcome is not. The smaller your benefit, the larger the share of your raise that Medicare takes before you ever see it. There is a related mechanism worth knowing about, because it occasionally protects people at the very bottom of the range. Medicare operates what is called a hold harmless provision. In broad terms, it prevents the Part B premium increase from reducing a beneficiary's net Social Security payment below what it was the year before. If the dollar increase in the premium would exceed the dollar increase from the cost of living adjustment, the premium increase is limited for most affected beneficiaries. It does not apply to everyone. People paying income-related surcharges are excluded, as are people newly enrolling in Medicare, and people whose premiums are not deducted from a Social Security payment. Hold harmless is a floor, not a benefit. It stops your net deposit from falling. It does nothing to help it rise. In a year like 2026, when the premium climbed 9.7% against a 2.8% adjustment, a great many people found themselves protected from an outright decrease, while receiving essentially none of the increase they had been told to expect. Understanding that distinction changes how you read the projections for 2027. The question is not whether you will be protected from losing ground. For most people, the answer to that is yes. The question is how much of the increase actually survives the trip from the announcement in October to the deposit in January. Which brings us to the number that decides whether any of this raise reaches you at all. And in 2027, for the first time in 4 years, that number may finally break in your favor. May. Every year this story runs, and every year the same complaint appears in a paragraph near the bottom, treated as a technical footnote. It is not a footnote. It is the reason your adjustment has felt inadequate for as long as you have been receiving one. Social Security adjustments are calculated using the CPIW, that is the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers. Read that name slowly because it describes exactly who it measures. Urban, wage earners, clerical workers. It measures the spending of working people, not retired people. This matters because the index is a weighted basket. It does not simply ask whether prices went up. It asks how much a typical household spends on each category, and then weights price changes by those shares. Gasoline gets a large weight because working households commute. Housing, food, apparel, transportation, all weighted according to how a working household allocates its money. Now consider how your spending differs. According to CBS News, advocates have long argued that the CPIW reflects the spending patterns of younger workers and underrepresents healthcare costs, which fall disproportionately on older households. Healthcare is the crux of it. If you are 70, healthcare is likely one of the largest categories in your budget. Premiums, supplemental coverage, prescriptions, dental work that Medicare does not cover, hearing aids, vision, copays, transportation to appointments. For a 35-year-old wage earner, healthcare is a small slice. So when medical costs rise faster than general inflation, which they have done for most of the last several decades, the CPIW registers that increase at the weight appropriate for a 35-year-old. Your adjustment is then calculated from that understatement. You absorb the difference. Do that for 15 years, and you get exactly the number the Senior Citizens League measured. Roughly 20% of purchasing power gone since 2010. There is a fix that has been discussed in Washington for decades. The Bureau of Labor Statistics already publishes an experimental index called the CPI-E, where the E stands for elderly. It weights the basket according to the spending of households headed by someone 62 or older. Healthcare carries a much larger weight. Housing carries a larger weight. Transportation carries a smaller one. The CPI-E has generally, though not always, run slightly higher than the CPI-W. Legislation to switch the adjustment formula to the CPI-E has been introduced repeatedly across many Congresses. It has never become law. The reason is straightforward and rarely stated plainly. A higher adjustment formula costs the trust fund more money, and the trust fund is already facing a depletion date inside the next decade. Switching to the CPI-E would improve the adequacy of individual benefits while accelerating the arrival of the shortfall. Washington has consistently chosen the arithmetic that preserves the fund over the arithmetic that preserves your purchasing power. That is not a conspiracy. It is a trade-off made openly in public, and it has been made the same way for 50 years. It is worth being fair to the other side of that argument, because it is not frivolous. The CPI-E is still classified as experimental. It is built on a smaller sample of households, which makes it statistically noisier than the CPI-W. Its healthcare weighting captures out-of-pocket spending in a way that some economists argue double counts costs already covered by Medicare. And in a handful of years, it has actually come in lower than the CPI-W, which would have produced a smaller adjustment rather than a larger one. Advocates rarely mention those years. The honest summary is that the CPI-E would probably deliver modestly higher adjustments over a long horizon, at a real cost to a trust fund already projected to face a shortfall, and with more year-to-year volatility than the current measure. Reasonable people land on different sides of that. What is not defensible is the way the question gets buried in the final paragraph of coverage every October, described as a technical debate, when it is the single largest structural determinant of whether the system keeps pace with the lives of the people inside it. There is one more wrinkle that almost never surfaces. Because the adjustment is rounded to the nearest tenth of a percent, tiny differences in the underlying data can shift the announced figure. A calculation landing at 3.649% becomes 3.6. A calculation at 3.651 becomes 3.7. On an average benefit, that rounding is worth a couple of dollars a month, which compounds forward like everything else. It is a reminder that the number announced in October is not a judgment about what you need. It is the output of a division problem, rounded. But here is what makes 2027 genuinely different from the last several years, and it has nothing to do with which index is used. It has to do with a number CMS has not announced yet, and two credible sets of forecasters who disagree about it by nearly $10 a month. For most people who receive Social Security and are enrolled in traditional Medicare, the Part B premium is deducted directly from the benefit before it is deposited. You never touch it. Your check arrives already reduced. This is why the adjustment number on its own tells you almost nothing. What determines whether you actually gained ground is the difference between the two. The recent history here is brutal, and the figures come from the Motley Fool's analysis of the Medicare trustees' data. In 2024, the adjustment was 3.2%, while the Part B premium rose 5.9%. In 2025, the adjustment was 2.5%, while Part B rose 5.9% again. In 2026, the year you are in now, the adjustment was 2.8%, while the Part B premium rose 9.7%, climbing from $185 to $202.9 a month. 3 consecutive years in which the single largest deduction from your benefit grew faster, in some cases far faster, than the benefit itself. In 2026, the arithmetic was stark. A 2.8% adjustment on a $2,000 benefit produced about $56. The Part B increase took 17.9 of it. Nearly a third of the raise was gone before it arrived, and that is before considering that everything else you buy also rose. Now the 2027 projection. According to the Medicare Trustees report released in June, the standard Part B premium is projected at $209.5 per month for 2027. That is an increase of $6.6, or roughly 3.25%. Compare that to the projected adjustment of 3.6 to 3.8%. For the first time since 2023, the Social Security adjustment is projected to rise by a larger percentage than the Part B premium. According to the Motley Fool, that would mean retirees enrolled in traditional Medicare retain more of their annual increase and potentially gain a small amount of ground against the purchasing power erosion of the last 15 years. Sit with how unusual that is. The projected adjustment fell by a full point, and the outcome may still be better than the year the adjustment was higher, because the deduction on the other side is projected to grow slowly. That is the answer to the promise made at the start of this video. A smaller raise can leave you better off than a larger one, because the raise is only half of the equation and almost all the coverage only reports that half. But notice how many times the word projected appeared in the last 2 minutes. The trustees' figure is a projection made in June. CMS does not set the official Part B premium until late in the fall. And there is a serious reason to doubt that projection. Independent forecasters are publishing a materially different number, and the historical record suggests they may be closer to right. The Medicare trustees project $209.5 for the 2027 standard Part B premium. Private forecasters are projecting something quite different. According to an analysis by Drew Wood published at 24/7 Wall Street on July 7, 2026, and summarized by Yahoo Finance, private forecasters expect the 2027 premium to land somewhere between $216 and $219 per month. The reasoning is simple. Applying a 6% increase to the 2026 premium of $202.9 puts you near $215, and recent premium growth has repeatedly exceeded 6%. That is a gap of roughly $7 to $10 per month against the trustees' figure. It sounds trivial. It is not, and here is why. If the premium lands at $209.5 as the trustees project, the increase is $6.6. Against a $75 raise for the average recipient that consumes about 9%. You keep the rest. You gain ground. If the premium lands at $217 as private forecasters expect, the increase is $14.1. Against the same $75 raise that consumes about 19%. You still gain ground, but only half as much, and for anyone with a below-average benefit the gain narrows toward nothing. The entire silver lining of 2027 rests on which of these two numbers is correct. The historical record is not comforting. According to the Yahoo Finance analysis, trustees' projections have repeatedly underestimated the actual premium. The clearest example given is 2021, when the trustees projected that the 2022 Part B premium would be $158.5. CMS finalized it at $170.1. That is a miss of nearly $12 a month, and it went in the direction that cost beneficiaries money. There is a structural reason for this pattern. The trustees produced their projection in the spring, working from assumptions about utilization, provider payment rates, and drug spending. By the fall, CMS has better data, and in recent years that data has consistently pointed toward higher spending, particularly on newly covered high-cost medications. Which brings up a specific 2027 pressure worth naming. In July 2026, CMS launched a demonstration program providing certain Medicare Part D beneficiaries access to particular weight loss medications at a flat $50 monthly copayment, running through the end of 2027. That program sits in Part D rather than Part B, so it does not mechanically drive the Part B premium. But it is a signal about the direction of Medicare drug spending generally, and Part B carries its own substantial drug costs for medications administered in clinical settings. So you have two credible projections, roughly $10 apart, and a track record suggesting the higher one is more likely. Neither will be resolved until the fall. It is worth understanding why the Part B premium behaves the way it does, because it is not arbitrary either. By law, the standard premium is set to cover approximately 25% of the projected cost of Part B services for the coming year, with general revenues covering the rest. That means the premium is essentially a quarter share of whatever Medicare expects to spend on physician services, outpatient care, durable medical equipment, and clinician-administered drugs. Follow that logic and the recent history stops looking like a series of decisions and starts looking like a consequence. When Medicare spending on any of those categories accelerates, the premium accelerates with it, automatically, regardless of what inflation did or what the Social Security adjustment turned out to be. The 9.7% premium increase for 2026 was not a choice made against retirees. It was a quarter share of a spending forecast that had risen sharply. There is also a reserve component. CMS maintains a contingency margin in the Part B trust account, and when that margin has been drawn down, it must be rebuilt, which pushes the premium above what current year spending alone would justify. Several of the larger recent increases carried exactly that kind of catch-up element inside them. None of this is comforting, but it is clarifying. The premium is not going to be negotiated down in response to a disappointing cost of living adjustment. The two numbers are produced by completely separate machinery, on separate timelines, by separate agencies, and they meet for the first time on your benefit statement. And for one specific group of people, none of this is the main event, because a completely separate Medicare calculation is about to hit them using income they earned 2 years ago and can no longer change. Everything discussed so far assumes you pay the standard Part B premium. Many people do not. Medicare applies an income-related monthly adjustment amount, universally referred to as IRMAA, to beneficiaries above certain income thresholds. It is a surcharge added on top of the standard premium, and it works in brackets. Cross a threshold by $1 and you pay the entire next tier. According to the Yahoo Finance analysis, the 2026 IRMAA thresholds begin at $109,000 for a single filer and $218,000 for joint filers. The surcharges for 2026 range from $81.2 to $487 per month on top of the standard premium. At the highest tier, the total Part B premium for 2026 reaches $689.9 per month. Now the detail that catches people every single year. IRMAA uses a 2-year lookback. Your 2027 premium is determined by your income as reported on your 2025 tax return. 2025 is finished. That return is filed. Whatever happened in that year, a Roth conversion, the sale of a property, an unusually large distribution, a business exit, an inheritance that generated taxable income, a spouse's death that moved you from joint to single filing thresholds, all of it is locked in and will determine what Medicare charges you in 2027. Consider the mechanics for someone in this position. They receive a 3.6% adjustment, roughly $75 on an average benefit or considerably more on a larger one. They simultaneously cross an IRMAA threshold because of something that happened in 2025. The surcharge at the first tier alone is $81.2 a month at 2026 levels. Their raise is gone, not reduced, gone and then some. Their net deposit falls despite receiving a cost of living increase. This is not a rare edge case. It happens every year to people who took a one-time action in a single tax year without realizing it would set their Medicare premium 2 years later. The Social Security Administration does provide a process for requesting reconsideration when a life-changing event has occurred, including retirement, the death of a spouse, divorce, or the loss of income-producing property. That process exists and is used. But it requires the beneficiary to know it exists and to initiate it, and many people first learn about IRMAA when the notice arrives. There is a second group affected differently. People who are enrolled in Medicare but are not yet collecting Social Security pay their Part B premium directly rather than having it deducted. For them, the adjustment and the premium are not netted against each other. They feel the full premium increase as a bill while their eventual benefit is being calculated on a smaller base. And there is a third group. According to CBS News reporting on the broader picture, roughly 85 million Americans receive either Social Security or supplemental security income. Not all of them are Medicare-enrolled retirees. Disability recipients, survivors, and SSI recipients each experience this arithmetic differently, and SSI recipients in particular operate under resource limits that have not been meaningfully adjusted for decades. The formula is one formula. The outcomes fan out enormously depending on where you sit. So what are people actually doing with this information, 3 months before anyone knows the real number? It is worth being careful here, because this is exactly the point in a story like this where speculation gets presented as guidance. What follows is a description of what is being discussed and what mechanisms exist, not a recommendation about what anyone should do. The most commonly discussed response has nothing to do with 2027 at all. It concerns the current tax year. Because IRMAA operates on a 2-year lookback, the income being recorded right now, in 2026, is what determines Medicare premiums in 2028. Financial planners quoted across the coverage note that people who are approaching a bracket threshold are examining the timing of discretionary income events, because a threshold crossed by a small margin triggers an entire tier. Whether that is relevant to any individual depends on facts a general video cannot assess. A second area of discussion involves the reconsideration process already mentioned. The Social Security Administration accepts requests to recalculate an IRMAA determination when a qualifying life-changing event has occurred. The list of qualifying events is specific and published. Some people who are entitled to relief never request it simply because they do not know the process exists. A third topic, and this one is genuinely contested, concerns whether to make decisions at all based on a projection. The projections have moved from 4.7% to the mid-threes within a single month. The Part B projections span roughly $10. Alex Moore of the Senior Citizens League described the environment to CBS News as one where inflation is pretty unstable. Some advisors argue the reasonable response to a forecast this volatile is to plan against the more conservative figure and treat anything better as a surprise. Others point out that planning around the low end of a range consistently, year after year, has its own costs. There is a fourth conversation happening in Washington rather than in households. Advocacy organizations including AARP and the Senior Citizens League have used the July revision to renew the argument for changing the index from the CPI-W to the CPI-E. That argument has been made in essentially every Congress for decades. Nothing about the July report changes the underlying political arithmetic, which is that a more generous formula accelerates the trust fund shortfall. What is genuinely actionable, in the narrow sense that it requires no prediction at all, is knowing your own numbers. Most people do not know their exact current benefit amount, do not know what their 2025 modified adjusted gross income was, and therefore cannot tell whether an IRMAA bracket is anywhere near them. That information sits in a Social Security account and on a filed tax return. It requires no forecast to look at. And there is one date that requires no forecast either, because it is already fixed on the calendar, and it is the only date on which any of this stops being a projection. 3 reports and 1 announcement decide everything discussed in this video, and all 4 have dates. The July inflation data is released in August. The August data is released in September. The September data is released in October. Those 3 CPI-W readings, averaged and compared against the same 3 months of 2025, produce the 2027 cost of living adjustment. Nothing before July counts. The June report that generated every headline this month has no direct role in the calculation whatsoever. The Social Security Administration will announce the official 2027 adjustment on October 14, 2026, according to CBS News. That is the date the number stops moving. Watch the composition of those three reports, not just the headline. Energy drove the June decline, and energy is volatile enough to reverse. If the fall brings higher fuel or heating costs, the adjustment lands nearer the top of the current range. If the recent slide continues, it lands nearer the bottom, or below it. Watch the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services separately, and later. CMS sets the official 2027 Part B premium after the Social Security announcement, typically in November. The trustees project $209.5. Private forecasters cited by Yahoo Finance project $216 to $219. That gap of roughly $10 a month determines whether 2027 is the first year since 2023 that your adjustment genuinely outruns your largest deduction, or whether it merely comes close. Watch your own IRMAA position, because it is the one variable already determined. Your 2025 tax return set your 2027 Medicare premium. If something unusual happened in that year, the surcharge is coming regardless of what inflation does between now and September, and the reconsideration process for a qualifying life-changing event has to be initiated by you. And watch the CPI conversation without expecting much from it. The index exists. The legislation has been written many times. The trust fund arithmetic has blocked it every time. If that ever changes, it will be an enormous story, and it will not happen quietly. Here is the takeaway worth carrying out of this. The number that moved this month was not your raise. It was a forecast of your raise, built on a report that does not enter the formula, revised by analysts who have already revised once this year, and said openly that conditions are unstable. Meanwhile, the number that actually determines whether the raise reaches your account, the Part B premium, has not been set, and the two credible projections for it disagree by an amount large enough to change the answer. You will know the first half on October 14. You will know the second half a few weeks later. Until then, everything is arithmetic performed on data that has not been collected. This video is for informational purposes only and does not constitute financial, legal, or tax advice. Laws and policies change. Always consult a qualified professional before making any financial decision.